Hello friend, welcome back to my channel. I hope you're doing well. It's Tim here, and in this video I'll be guiding you through the steps to create these simple digital watercolor inspired sunflowers. Sunflowers are definitely among my favorite flowers, and this tutorial will definitely be a great one for beginners or experienced painters, so I'm super excited to share this with you. Upcoming here are the hex codes that you're going to need to paint this painting along with me, and for this tutorial specifically, you will need the watercolor brushes from Chomang Drawing here on YouTube to get the same kind of effect, but if you'd like to still paint along, I would recommend in the default library to use the old beach brush that's located in the artist section. It won't give you exactly the same effect, but it still will be pretty and it'll be kind of similar, but you are welcome to also use your own favorite brushes to paint along with. So getting right into the tutorial. So I'm going to use the watercolor paper number 2. This is my favorite of all of his paper grains. And the first thing I'm going to have you do is screenshot this flower outline and trace it into a blank layer. I'm going to put this trace layer on the very top and turn the opacity down to about 7%. I wanted to add too, the palette that you're going to have is going to look a little different than the one that I'm using. The one that you're going to be using is here on the bottom. So when I refer to colors, I will actually be referring to the palette that you're using, not the one that I'm using. I added a couple of colors to it in the middle, and later on I wanted to make sure that the palette was correct, so that's why they look a little different. I'm then going to use the 6th color in the first row and color drop this pale beige color into a layer underneath the paper layer, filling the whole layer up. We're going to add a new layer, and then using the hard edge brush with a small size and full opacity with the yellow that is the 5th color in your palette, I'm going to outline all of the petals of all of the sunflowers. Then on the same layer with the same color, just making the brush size just a little bit bigger, we're going to fill in each of these new flowers. I also recommend during this stage to try not to lift your brush too much. The more brush strokes you add, the darker the petals are going to get. So what I ended up doing was just filling in small areas at once and filling each half of the flower separately. And then I'm going to repeat the same step over the other flowers. Now that we've got our petals painted, next I'm going to add a new layer, and I'm going to put this layer underneath of the flowers we just painted, and I'm going to use the brown that is the 6th color in the first row, and we're going to fill in the area of the centers of each flower, just allowing a little bit of that transparency to kind of saturate around the edges, and that'll make the yellows of the petals just a little bit darker, giving us just a little bit more depth in the transparency. And then on this same layer, using the same brown, I'm going to paint a small circle in the centers and then paint a circle around the center, leaving a small lighter ring of color around the darker center, and then I'm going to repeat this on the other flowers. I'm going to put just a little bit of that darker color underneath the flower on the left side too. I know it's kind of sideways, but just to give it a little bit more depth. And then we're going to switch over to the blend tool with the smudge brush. With a small size, we're going to blur just the edges of the color out, just kind of softening the darker ring under the petals. And then we're going to repeat the same step across all of the flowers. Now we're going to add a new layer, and still using the same brush, using the green that is the second color in the first row, I'm going to fill in the sunflower outline, starting with the leftmost flower, creating the stem and the back of the flower. And then once you have that created, similar to the flowers, using a very small size brush, I'm going to outline all of the leaves. Once you have your outline created, on that same layer with a larger brush, I'm going to fill in the outline of the leaves we've just created with the same color. And with this step too, you'll want to be careful about not overlapping the petals too much because it will kind of tint the edges of the yellow as well, so just be careful. Now with a small to medium brush size and a light hand, we're going to add some stems to our sunflowers. Next, we're going to add another new layer, and we're going to put this layer underneath of this leaf layer we just created, and then switching over to the darkest green, that is the first color in the first row, I'm only going to fill in half of each leaf. Once you have your leaves filled in, I'm going to take this layer opacity and I'm going to turn it down to about 46% or so. Alright, so now to paint the vase. So the easiest thing I've found to do is just to turn on the drawing guide, and we're going to use vertical symmetry, and then we're going to turn the drawing assist on our layer as well, just so that it's even. Once you have this turned on, using the first color in the second row, that is that medium gray blue color, we're going to create a new layer and then put that over the petal layer so it's on the very top now. And I'm going to outline the vase and then fill in the vase outline, just like I did with the petals and the leaves. And then I'm going to turn this layer opacity down to about 75%. Then I'm going to create another new layer over the top and put this layer into Drawing Assist again, and then using that same shade of gray, we're going to create the water. And I actually like how dark the water's looking against the glass, so I'm just going to leave it the opacity that it is. Next, I'm going to create another new layer, and then I'm going to put this layer over top of the original leaf layer. Using that second color in the first row again, I'm going to pick a couple of the leaves and fill them in a little bit more, just to kind of deepen up the color of those leaves. I'm then going to create another new layer on top of these two leaf layers, and I'm going to turn the opacity of this layer down to about 25%, and using the first green in the first row, which is the darker of the two greens, we're going to place a little bit more of that green in the centers of each of the leaves, leaving just a little bit of that light outline around the edges. Now to start our finishing details. So next I'm going to add a new layer over top of the original base layer, and then using the same dark green, I'm going to put that layer in Drawing Assist mode and then outline the base with a small size brush. Then I'm going to turn the opacity of the outline down to about 46% or so, and then I'm going in and lightly and very carefully erasing the areas where the base outline overlapped a leaf. And the reason I put this layer over the leaves was because I want this outline to be over the stems, so I just figured it would be more easy to go in and erase it where it overlapped the leaves at. I'm going to go to the top of the layers and add a new one, and then I'm going to put this layer into Soft Light, and then using the brown, that is the sixth color in the first row, I'm going to lay some shadow down over the middle of all of the leaves, around the center of the petals, and the bottom of the vase. And then once you're happy with all of the shadows, I'm going to turn the saturation of this layer down to about 34%. I'm then going to create another new layer on top of this one and switch over to the pencil brush. And then using the fourth color in the first row, we're going to create little detail dots in the center of each of the sunflowers. And then if your dots are still a little too bright, you can always take the hue and saturation tool and turn them down just a little bit. I'm going to turn mine to about 42%. Next, adding a new layer and using the third color in the first row, the lightest shade of green. Still with the pencil brush, I'm going to outline and add a center line for each of the leaves, and then I'm going to turn down the brightness to about 45%. Alright, so after we have this adjusted, I'm going to go back to the top of the layers and add another new one. We're going to put it into soft light and switch back to the hard edge brush. We're going to use the sixth color in the first row again, and we're going to lay a little bit of color down the center of the vase. We're going to open hue and saturation, and I'm going to turn the brightness all the way down and the saturation down to like 31% or so, just to get rid of any of the tone. And then I'm going to turn the layer opacity down to about 38%, which will give us just a little bit more shadow and deepen the transparency effect in the water, which will look really cool. And the last thing I want to do is using the fourth color in the first row and switching back to the pencil brush. I'm going to periodically outline the petals of the flowers with a really small brush size so we can sharpen up the edges a little bit. And then once you're happy with your outlining, I'm going to turn the opacity of this layer down to about 70% and we're done. Okay, so I wanted to add a little surprise addition to the end of this. So I went ahead and painted this painting with the old beach brush from the default library, which actually gave me a pretty decent result. Not exactly the same, but still pretty pleased with it. But I also wanted to show you how you can create a paper grain from the default library. So here's a bonus hex code that you're going to need for this color. So what I'm going to do is, using the gloaming brush that's in the drawing section of the default library, we're going to add a new layer completely behind the sunflowers, and then adjusting the brush to its largest size and trying not to lift the brush, we're going to lay down a wash of color over the entire canvas size. I'm then going to turn the brightness of this layer down to about 55%. After we have this adjusted, I'm going to create a copy of this layer, and then I'm going to put this layer into hard light. I'm going to turn the brightness of this layer all the way down so it's black, and then we're going to turn the opacity of this layer down to about 11%. After we have this adjusted, I'm going to make a copy of this layer. We're going to put this new copy over top of the sunflowers and everything we just painted, and we're going to put this layer into soft light, and we're going to turn the opacity of it down to about 11%. Which will now give us a makeshift texture from the default library, which is really cool, so I wanted to share that with you guys. And I wanted to zoom up here so you guys can see what kind of texture it'll leave behind. It's not perfect, but it's a decent alternative for just being in the default library. I found it's one of the only brushes that'll kind of leave a paper-ish texture behind. So I hope you guys enjoyed the tutorial. I had so much fun creating it for you. And if you're interested in painting some landscapes, I have a couple of videos up on my channel that you might like. And if you like content like this, please like, comment, and subscribe. And I'll see you in the next video, friend. Happy painting!